I'm Michael Pauley, and this is Faith in Politics. On this broadcast, we range from the soul to the state as we cultivate those virtues and explore those principles that help us live well as faithful Catholics in this great land. Well, good day, everyone. We're recording this show in the studio of the Diocese of Sioux Falls, and normally I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Motz, but unfortunately, he got pulled into a last-minute meeting with the bishop, and so I am flying solo this morning. But anyway, I love doing the show from here in Sioux Falls because then I don't have to fuss with setting up microphones and Zoom links. And I'll just admit I'm a total dunce when it comes to technology. So I love it when Casey Bassett, our brilliant studio manager, handles all those details. So thank you, Casey, for making us all look and sound good. We really appreciate it. So this is the 106th episode of Faith in Politics, but as regular listeners will know, the first 100 or so of those episodes were produced by my co-host Chris before I joined the South Dakota Catholic Conference. And one of the things I've been doing lately is sort of binge watching reruns of Faith in Politics. And since there's 100 of them, I've been quite busy doing that, doing it while I exercise, while I'm drinking my morning coffee. And one of the things that has been striking to me as I've reviewed these old episodes of Faith in Politics is how it's this combination of the really old and the really new. So, for example, one episode we might be focused on a specific bill before a specific committee in the legislature and educating people about that bill. And then the next week, it's going back 2,400 years in time, and we're talking about the ethics of Aristotle. And that strikes me as part of the genius of this show, and I guess you could say really the genius of Catholicism, which is that, we're engaged in these present-day battles, but as we do so, we're constantly anchoring ourselves in the truths and experiences of the past. So today, we have a guest for the show who I think excels at applying the wisdom of the past to our present-day political realities, and that is Father Henry Stephan. Father Henry is a Dominican priest who is currently at Notre Dame University. He's a doctoral student there. He received his undergraduate education at Princeton University and his graduate degree in theology from the Dominican House of Studies. Father Henry grew up in the Bay Area of California in San Jose, so maybe as an extra bonus today, he'll help us understand California politics, which would be a real miracle, I think. So, Father Henry Stephan, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Michael. It's really good to be with you.
When I read your profile on the University of Notre Dame webpage, I was really struck by this line that you wrote. You said, I'm interested in the intersection of faith and politics in medieval Europe and how political philosophers and theologians sought to reconcile the tensions of heavenly and earthly citizenship. And of course, the first thought that came to my mind is, well, here we are, many centuries past the medieval era, and we are still trying to reconcile the tensions of heavenly and earthly citizenship. I was blessed earlier this summer to hear you give a talk before a Catholic audience, talking about the heavenly and earthly citizenship, and a lot of your talk focused on specifically on the thinking of St. Augustine on this matter, especially as he wrote it down in his seminal work, The City of God. And I know it's perhaps an unfair question for a book that weighs anywhere from 700 to over 1,000 pages, depending upon which edition you have. But what would you say are maybe for contemporary Christians? What are the three most important takeaways for Saint Augustine as he wrote them down in The City of God?
Sure, it's The City of God is a seminal work, and per what you were saying, I think that we will always be struggling to work out and reconcile our belonging to heaven, our pilgrimage towards heaven, and the realities of striving to make the earthly city better and to make it the kind of place where we can work out our salvation and where we can flourish in union with God. And that work will never be completed this side of paradise. It will always be a challenge, and politics and religion will always be thorny and knotty problems right up until the last moment. But that's not a bad thing in a real sense. It gives us a great chance to grow in virtue and to be able to rely on God's grace. So you ask what the three big takeaways from St. Augustine's City of God. That's such a big question, but I tend to focus on a few of the key themes. I think first and foremost, St. Augustine is all about peace. We were made for peace. We're desperate for it. We need it. And gosh, isn't that true in the spiritual life, in the life of our country, in our political life? All these places we sense the lack of peace, sometimes in actual wars taking place, Ukraine and Russia, but also just the strife that can tear apart communities, families, our own sense of well-being. For St. Augustine, peace comes from God. Peace is God himself. And we were made for peace, and everything, if it's true and good, will lead us towards that peace. His second point, though, is that all too often human beings try to build peace on their own terms rather than as a gift from God. So oftentimes, this is his account of the city of man, as it were, that the city of man is kind of an emblem or a metaphor for the way in which we, through our self-assertion, try to build the peace that we can really only get from God himself, and all the different ways in which we do that. The city of man runs through each and every human heart, right? It would be easy if it were just those guys over there, but no, there's a lot of self-assertion. There's a lot of desire for power, for domination, for control that we all have. And even in the pursuit of good ends, that can throw us off track. But the final thing, and I think that the most important thing in a certain sense, is our reliance on the grace of our union with Christ. That is the means by which we are adopted citizens of the heavenly kingdom, by which we're united to Christ, and we're going to be, God willing, fellow citizens with the saints in heaven. So here on earth, it's imperfect. We're like strangers in a strange land, to quote St. Paul. We're wandering. We're like Abraham, setting out from the place we know and going through a place that we are not always familiar with. But like him, we're destined for a heavenly city. And so it is in our life of faith, our union with God, that we're led there.
Very good. And so fast forwarding several centuries here past Augustine, we come to the figure of Thomas Aquinas, who, as a Dominican, you've obviously spent a profound amount of time studying his thinking, and of course he studies Augustine in careful detail. Talk to us about Thomas Aquinas on Augustine. Just any points of agreement, points of expansion or departure from Augustine's thought on politics.
St. Augustine is one of the most quoted sources in St. Thomas. There are some theologians, I think, who have said that all of Western theology is an extended commentary on St. Augustine. And I think that there's certainly an amount of truth to that. St. Thomas's great genius was not necessarily pure originality. It was his synthesis. It was his ordering, his structuring, his ability to draw on Scripture, the Fathers, philosophy, all these sources of wisdom and of truth, and be able to create a structure whereby we can learn and understand and see things as they are. Of course, in the academy, sometimes people throw around terms like an Augustinian account of politics. That isn't always a useful term, because it often means that different commentators on Augustine have emphasized different aspects. So when you hear the phrase Augustinian, often that's code word for a kind of skeptical or negative view about political life. Politics is punishment for original sin in that reading. It's the notion that politics is a necessary evil, but one that we just kind of get through. Politics is something that, we have to endure, but in the end doesn't get to the heart of what we are. Thomas's reading of Augustine is different, and the kind of Thomistic gloss is more optimistic. For St. Thomas, politics is part of being human. We would have had politics even without the fall in the Thomistic account. Now they would have looked much better and a lot different.
Absolutely.
But politics for St. Thomas points to God's government of the universe. God governs the universe wisely and graciously, and we participate in that. As long as you have multiple people, as long as you're pursuing the common good, you need to coordinate that somehow. So for St. Thomas, it doesn't mean to be faithful to Augustine means to view politics just as a bad thing. We're political animals. He borrows that from Aristotle. We're made for communion, for union with other people. And I think that St. Thomas's read of St. Augustine is an apt one. It's just when people use the term Augustinian and Thomistic, sometimes they use them as contrasts or as polarities.
Yeah, I understand. So let me throw out maybe an unfair question, but I'll just ask, true or false, is there an ideal form of government that all Christians should gravitate towards?
No.
Okay.
I don't think that the church has stated that, and the truth is, every Christian is obliged to work towards justice, towards having a government that renders what is just to each and every citizen, and in a real respect towards God. So a just regime is one that is never fully realized this side of paradise. St. Augustine has a fascinating section in The City of God where he evaluates the Roman Republic and considers whether or not it lives up to its definition of a just republic, Cicero's definition. And he says, no, it fails. No earthly government is ever fully just, but we can get closer or farther away. So the ideal form of government is going to vary by the age. There are so many circumstances that play into it: education, technology, the geographical circumstances, the history and temperament of a people, the conditions, the religion. All of these different things mean that the church is always having to apply perennial truths and the truths of the goodness of the human person, of our duties towards God, of justice itself, to every different kind of regime. I think, not to try to put words in your mouth here, but I think maybe we could say that the Catholic tradition doesn't endorse a particular form of organizing our political life, but what it does provide, I guess, is a sort of a method for evaluating those systems, through the principles of Catholic social teaching, principle of subsidiarity, the dignity of the human person, that we, in a sense, evaluate our different political regimes based upon whether they advance those principles. Would that be a fair statement? I think that's absolutely fair. And the truth is, of course, we don't have to be completely agnostic here. Some types of regime are clearly going to be more tending towards closeness, towards upholding certain elements. But no regime is perfect. No regime is immune from its own disintegration or forms of corruption or decadence. Every type of political order contains within it the seeds of its own downfall. So there is no perfect or ideal regime. Every era requires a kind of return to faithfulness to truth and to the principles of justice. Yeah,
absolutely. So I was really struck when I was blessed to hear a talk you gave earlier this summer before a Catholic audience. One thing that really stood out for me is you talked about 3 dangerous temptations that Catholics face as we grapple with the politics of our modern era. And I want to just dive into these and take them up one at a time.
Sure.
The first temptation that I recall you mentioning, and I think I recorded the wording of this correctly, is kowtowing to the spirit of the age. And so just wondering if you can expand a little bit on why is this a temptation, or how is this a temptation, and why is it dangerous?
I think that this is something that the scriptures warn us against, right? The spirit of the world, the spirit of the age. There is always a temptation to conform and to lose what is unique in being followers of Christ and being adopted sons and daughters of God, and instead to be like other nations. I mean, this is what the entirety of Israel's journey in the Old Testament is all about, right? They want to be like other nations, and God wants them to be his people, to be distinct, to follow him. And this is something that cuts through each and every one of us. We want to get along. We want to be like other people. We want to conform. And the truth is, the spirit of the age is not uniquely bad now. It's a temptation in every age, and at some points it's more dangerous, corrosive, and toxic than others. And we have unique vulnerabilities now. The desire to go after contemporary social trends and to say, yeah, we're like that too. We can do the same thing that you're doing. It's always a temptation because it allows us to think that we've somehow achieved a victory when we align ourselves with a successful coalition. It's important to be part of the political conversation, to be part of political life. I mean, that's the important work that you do, and that each Christian is called to in his own or in her own way. But at the same time, we cannot allow ourselves to be informed by this spirit of the age that wants to give its own version of truth, its own counterfeit religion. We need to be faithful to the truth and to God himself.
Yeah. And I guess as we look to history, regrettably, we're not at a loss for examples of times when Catholic church leaders and the Catholic laity have tried too hard to conform themselves to the spirit of the time. I think of the rise of National Socialism in Germany, where you see so many examples of heroic resistance, amongst, various Catholic clergy and bishops and laity, so much resistance to the rise of National Socialism. And yet we have to be honest that while some were heroically resisting, others were trying to find a way to, in a sense, sort of baptize that spirit of the age, to try to somehow imagine that the truths of our Catholic faith were not irreconcilable with National Socialism. And of course, tragically, we found out too late in some cases that that couldn't be done. So, well, a second temptation from your talk that you mentioned is when people form a belief that all of our political woes and dysfunctions can somehow be corrected if we just return to some previous era of history when everything was better. And I'm wondering if you can just unpack that temptation for our audience.
I mean, I am wearing a medieval habit right now. I am a member of the Dominican order. I'm in the Medieval Institute. I'm here talking about St. Augustine and St. Thomas. I get the appeal of the past. I am a temperamental conservative in the truest sense of the word. I love the past, and I love the glories of Christendom and the tremendous things that have been achieved, by our forebears. At the same time, to study this history and to study the history of politics, of political thought deeply, is to come to the realization that there has been no perfect era. There has been no era that is the epitome of Christian polity to which we always need to hearken back. There have been some really great things, some tremendous achievements, some noble, saintly, just, and virtuous things that we've lost that we should hearken back to. But at the same time, there was a lot of complexity and murkiness, to the witness of faith and to the establishment of justice, at the time in the Middle Ages. It's easy to come up with a kind of historical pastiche and to say modern bad, medieval good, or to say medieval bad, ancient world good. Different people, depending upon your intellectual genealogy or what you love, they'll create kind of the white-black mentality of finding in one era all that was good, and then it was all lost thanks to the corruption of somebody, And we Dominicans can do this too. We blame the Scotists, we blame the advent of modernity in some crucial sense for breaking apart the unity of the sciences, but we have to be careful against an overly simplistic genealogy.
Yeah, absolutely. What you were saying reminds me of this book I've been reading by James Hitchcock, The History of the Catholic Church, and I'm up to I'm up to the French Revolution now, so I've progressed through a good deal of this volume. But I have to agree with you that when you actually sit down and read a good solid history book of 2,000 years of the Catholic Church, you're kind of thumbing through the pages and going, I'm really trying to find this ideal era where everything was perfect and the church had no problems. And it is really, you find in every age, troubles. And again, that it's not to be relativistic. I mean, you can certainly hone in on certain eras of history where, things were worse in this era or better than that era. But I think it's true that in every chapter of the church's history, you find serious problems, serious struggles, Yeah.
This should be something of a consolation to us.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's easy to think doom and despair. Everything is getting worse. It's uniquely bad. Now, in certain ways, I'm right there with you, right? I mean, there is some real profound, horrific confusion and blindness to reality that we're having to deal with right now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are not unlike our forebears. Every era struggles with its blind spots, with its intellectual patterns that blind it to certain elements of truth, with patterns of behavior that seem just inevitable, ingrained, or entirely predetermined. And so every age requires a kind of witness of heroic sanctity. Every age requires us to go back to the sources and to be, honest but faithful critics of our own age. And every political regime can do with improving, which is why we can't give up on it. We've got to work for it, and we've got to strive to bring the uniquely Catholic voice to each and every age of our political life. We can't withdraw from it. We need to be engaged.
Oh, amen. Amen to that. So now I want to go into the third temptation, because of course we're Catholic, so everything comes in three when you're Catholic. So
absolutely.
Temptation number 3 is to allow the church to be co-opted or manipulated by a particular political party or group or movement. And I just was wondering if you can tell us how you see this sort of thing happening, either today or in the past, and can you just elaborate on the danger that poses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a French revolutionary general who once exclaimed something to the effect of, "There go the people. I must follow them, for I am their leader." And I don't know if that's strictly true, but I love the line, and I'm willing to bet that it has been said somewhere or sometime. This is a truth. When you're fighting a political battle, and the church is in a minority now, and it's getting smaller. The church has lost a tremendous amount of political clout over the past 50 to 70 years. It's been a really astonishing experience, and she's lost a lot of members. She has lost a lot of her internal reservoirs of strength in this country. So there's a lot, of difficulty that's all wrapped up with that. So when you're a minority, when you're facing a tough political battle, it's easy to get co-opted as being just another set of foot soldiers, and to then think that all your goals, that the whole essence of being a Catholic is somehow tied up with the victory of your political party. Again, this is not me calling for withdrawal or for being agnostic about political fights. There are certain fights we have to be part of and that we cannot stay neutral in. And I'm all for getting involved and being intensely passionate, participants in the political process. But we've always got to remember it's the peace of Christ that surpasses all understanding. You can win election after election, but you can still lose, the essence of what it means to be the church here in the U.S. You can achieve tremendous political victories, but at what cost? You've always got to be anchored, not in, as I said, the spirit of the age or the spirit of the world. You've got to be anchored in the truth of the gospel and the peace that comes not just from getting amped up on a political cycle that's very emotivistic and that's very, corrupt in a lot of ways, but to remain anchored in truth, anchored in the peace of Christ. That's the only way we can do politics without losing our sanity.
Yeah.
Politics these days is eating the world.
Yeah.
It's taking over everything. I study politics. I love politics, but it's nuts.
Yeah.
Have to not let politics devour our life of faith.
Yeah.
And that's as important as doing politics well. Doing politics well as Catholics means not letting it consume everything
Yeah.
and not letting yourself think that my whole spiritual life revolves around political stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you have to deal with this, Michael, given your job and the kind of work that you have to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And and I think that this is something I recall from your talk, and I think it was a thought of St. Augustine, is that we need to be involved in the business of the earthly city, i.e. politics, if for no other reason than to let the church, which is sort of the ambassador of the heavenly city, in order to allow the church to do its work,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an old classic expression, the freedom of the church, and this has always been kind of political goal number one, like the prime objective for Catholic involvement in political life is to secure the freedom of the church to be herself, to exercise her divine mission, to, help people be sanctified and to grow in union with God. When politics interferes with that, we are losing something invaluable, and we need to take steps to defend it.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to maybe go in a little bit of a different direction here, but
Sure.
A phrase that you often hear mentioned in discussions about the limits of what can be achieved in politics is don't imminentize the eschaton. See, I couldn't even pronounce it correctly. And I remember the first time I heard this expression, I strongly disliked it because I can't stand anything that smacks of insider jargon as opposed to using plain English. But I have come to appreciate over time that, this phrase really does just capture something. But for our listeners who aren't acquainted with it, define what it means to imminentize the eschaton, and why shouldn't we do it?
Sure. Well, it comes from Eric Voegelin, who is a great political philosopher of the 20th century. Imminentizing the eschaton is just it's a fancy way, I suppose, of trying to make heaven here on earth. The eschaton is the second coming. It's the last day. It's the relation of God, in the recapitulation of all things. Imminentize means to make present here and now, to make worldly, to anchor in our time. So politics that imminentizes the eschaton is the politics that is utopian, that tries to create heaven here on earth, that thinks that earthly success is the same as salvation. And this is a core point, that's not true. The forces of Marxism, Leninism, this was imminentizing the eschaton par excellence. Like, that was the explicit goal, the workers' utopia, the communist paradise here on earth. But it can be done in all sorts of different ways. How many political campaigns tell us, if I win, the oceans will recede, the clouds will part, the sun will shine. It will be morning in America yet again. I mean, every political campaign has to do this. Every political campaign does this. Yeah. But the degree to which we actually start to believe it on a deep level, that, everything will be fine if only X. That's imminentizing the eschaton. I think William Buckley and several other, he was the editor of the National Review, they had buttons, in the 1970s that said, don't imminentize the eschaton, because the political thought of the 60s and 70s often tended towards this belief in the perfectibility of mankind here on earth.
Yeah.
Nope, not going to happen. That's just not true. We have a theological and philosophical basis for saying that is just not true.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, there's the old cliche, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And there definitely seems to be, this recurring pattern in, the history of mankind, where whenever we seek after these utopian ideals that are unrealistic, we actually make our situation more miserable, than if we had focused on something that was a goal that was more modest and therefore more achievable. So, well, just a quick note, for our radio listeners, we're coming close to the end of our our time here, but we're going to continue the conversation with Father Henry. And if you'd like to listen to that, please visit our website, sdcatholicconference.org, and you can listen to the whole podcast posted there. So for our radio listeners, until next time, live well. All right, and for our podcast audience, we're going to continue the discussion with Father Henry.
This is the reward for the true believers. We're going to get to the really controversial stuff now.
That's right. Yeah, we save the best stuff for last because only the privileged few get to listen to this part of the conversation. But actually, with all joking aside, this next one we really will venture into a little bit of a, I guess you could say, a hot topic. And so in recent years, there's been this lively debate in Catholic intellectual circles on the subject of Catholic integralism. And I know some of our listeners are very familiar with this debate, but for those who are not, essentially this is a disagreement over whether Catholic beliefs can or should be harmonized with the dominant political and economic philosophy in the West during modern times, which is what we generally call classical liberalism. And so I know this is a huge subject, but just in brief, Father Henry, what is your take on this debate? Is this really just a clash between two different visions of what fallen man can reasonably be expected to achieve in politics?
I think it's a clash between about 50 different visions or 100 different visions,
Okay.
So integralism as a term is relatively recent. It's only maybe 2 centuries old. It refers to a vision that tries to integrate, to bring together the life of faith, the political order, the social order, and economic order, to integrate these things. What does that mean in practice? There are about as many answers as there are so-called integralists. You have all these different things. I can think of a few different, rough groupings of people who may be described in some way as integralists, but, that may also be unfair. So you have some people who are the self-described post-liberals, right? So this kind of more closely aligns with what you were just describing. These are people who are more deeply skeptical about the American liberal tradition. And by liberal, I don't mean progressive per se. I just mean, our kind of constitutional order. Mm-hmm. The belief that it's founded upon a faulty anthropology that's excessively Lockean or that is not sufficiently grounded in truths of human nature. So some of the people like this are Patrick Deneen here at Notre Dame, a good friend of mine, Adrian Vermeule at Harvard University is a law professor. One of my old teachers, Chad Pecknold, who taught a great course on the City of God at Catholic U. I don't think they would necessarily describe themselves as integralists. In the Catholic Twitter world, they're sometimes called that, but that's the post-liberal grouping. There are other Catholics who would claim the term explicitly, and they want to see church and state established in closer unity. Mm-hmm. They would emphasize kind of medieval and early modern papal documents and teachings of the church to focus on what the state owes the church and how the church is meant to arm the state in a certain sense, or to equip the state to bring about a Catholic social order. So that's one set. There's other groups that are much more modern. Like these are sometimes just internet cranks. Sometimes they're rooted in French movements from the late 19th, early 20th century. Some of these groups can be tainted by anti-Semitism, by all sorts of different things. It's unfair to kind of paint all of them with that brush, because the term integralism is so controverted. It applies to so many different things.
Yeah, on the subject of Catholic integralism, I wouldn't describe myself as a Catholic integralist, if for no other reason, just because, as you said, there could be like 50 different strains or definitions of what that actually means. But I have to say that I'm grateful for the contributions of Catholic intellectuals who are self-described integralists, because I do think that they ask valuable questions about our current classical liberal order, which seems to be fraying around the edges. I think both critics and defenders of what we call classical liberalism would find a point of agreement in this, which is that there's a lot of erosion around the edges of classical liberalism, and the problem that creates, I guess, for us is that you can imagine, I can imagine anyway, that the classical liberal order being replaced by something better, but it's also really easy to imagine it getting replaced by something worse. Would you agree with that, Father Henry?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that we have 3 points, at least that I have 3 points to make on this. As you said, it's
everything comes in threes.
Right, absolutely. The first is that we're clearly in an age of transition. The kind of social fabric, social trust is declining. And this is due to a variety of different causes. It is something that has affected both our political life and our religious life. And it is an age that is very much less stable, less predictable, and more prone to extremes and towards tearing apart. And so we're clearly in an age where we can't just keep singing from the same hymnal, close our eyes and hope that everything is fine. And so in that sense, yes, absolutely. We need to draw on all the depths of our tradition, on all our resources, and be able to both come up with an account of why this may have happened and call us towards something, whatever comes next. Secondly, I do think we need to exercise a due degree of caution, precisely because we live in an age where the church is seemingly getting weaker, not stronger. In this country, certainly, fidelity to the church's teaching and participation in the sacramental life are decreasing in most parts of the country. This should not, this is not doom. This has happened before, but this is happening in a severe way right now, and it's affecting everything. And so we should not necessarily presume that if we leave the liberal order, that the next thing that would come would somehow be a Catholic nirvana. It's like, no, far more likely it would be a worse regime than the one we're currently under, so yeah. I wouldn't be entirely sanguine about saying, the liberal order is passing away. It has a faulty anthropology, to heck with it. It's like, well, sure, there's plenty of limitations. There's plenty of, complexity we could add to this, but all in all, the church has been able to grow and flourish, notwithstanding the imperfections of our political order. And we can't take for granted that what comes next is necessarily going to be better. Catholics don't have that kind of clout, and simply wishing does not make it so. The final thing is, I do think that we always have to be mindful of our rootedness, rootedness in our faith, but also rootedness in a given tradition of a people, the history that we share. We can't just make a polity out of nothing. We don't just snatch truths out of the past. Our experience of it in the political life is always mediated through the habits, the ways, the small c constitution, as Aristotle would say, not the document, but the kind of the way that a people lives and governs itself. That doesn't make it all good, but it is ours, know. And so here I'm not offering an unqualified defense of every aspect of the American regime. I'm just saying, to a great degree, like any people, we do not just make the world over again when we find ourselves in a period of transition. We are going to be drawing on our past, on our traditions, on the character and the ways of our people. And if our political conversation becomes unmoored from that, well, what's that old Vogelin line about imminentizing the Eschaton? I think that should be like a red light danger zone, because that always seems like a risk to me. Doesn't mean that we always keep everything. It doesn't mean that we don't have changes, that we don't progress. But I think it is important that we always have a historical mindedness and a certain gratitude, to our fathers, to those who came before us. We don't just throw everything out with the bathwater.
Amen to that. Yeah, and one of the things that just really distresses me personally when I talk to so many people, and I know it's going to sound like I'm making an unfair generalization here, but particularly when I speak with younger people, is just the sheer number of them who almost seem to act as if history began the year that they were born. They just have such a incredibly finite view of things, and I think that contributes to this problem of imminentizing the Eschaton when your view of history is so narrow and you don't draw upon the wisdom and experience of previous ages. Well, this has been a terrific discussion. I wish we had more time, but maybe Father Henry, can we maybe have you back on for a future program?
I'd love it. I felt like we barely got controversial. I said very anodyne things.
I know.
Trust me, I have more controversial things I could say.
We'll try to spice it up the next time we have you on. Well, just for our listeners, I mentioned at the outset that I've been binge watching previous episodes of Faith and Politics. And if you're new to this program and you'd like to see some of the discussions with fascinating guests that we've had before, visit our website at sdcatholicconference.org. And you can find over 100 fascinating conversations with great guests and talking about stimulating topics. And so anyway, I've just really enjoyed this conversation with you, Father Henry, and we look forward to our next talk with you. That's all the time we have, folks. So until next time, live well.